Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to part 2 of my Europa Universalis 4 video, where we look at all the possible national ideas. And there's quite a bit more to talk about than I had anticipated to start off with, hence the awkward and very quick cut at the end of the last video. But let's continue over here. So I believe we were right around here at Excellent Shipwrights, which gives you +2 naval leader movement. At some point in the future, when I understand the systems better, I will have to do some videos discussing the specific mechanics for land and sea combat. And why maneuver is important. And I believe that maneuver actually plays a more important role in naval combat than on land. And it does affect a few things, including the ability to move quickly from sea province to sea province. Also, I think it affects the amount of attrition that you receive when you're outside of supply range. And it does also have some mechanics in battle. But some of the ideas that I have about maneuver in my head, I think I might be still sort of thinking of some of the mechanics from Hearts of Iron or Victoria, so I definitely don't want to say anything confusing. Next in queue, Naval Fighting Instruction, 50% more effective blockades. So blockades are when you are at war and you put your ships to blockade the port. So if I was at war with, say, Venice, and I put some ships in the Gulf of Venice here, then everywhere that had a dock or a port that was exposed to that particular sea, the Gulf of Venice, I would be blockading, and that would give me a ticking war score against my enemy. And it's a very, very, very powerful technique. I mean, what you're doing is you're blocking off their trade, their economy, you're messing all that up. But usually the specific bonus that you're looking for in combat is you get more and more and more of that war goal, and it's really great. I'm not sure all the side effects. Does it affect war exhaustion? Does it actually cripple their economy? Exactly what are the hard effects of blockading? But the important thing to me is always, well, it gives me more war scores, so that's very good, and this would give us 50% better, more effective blockades, which is a really, really nice thing. If you're going to be a naval power, and obviously in naval ideas you're going to be, then blockades are going to be probably the single most powerful tool in your weapons chest, I suppose, to defeat your enemies. Press gangs, 33% cheaper ship cost. So historically, press gangs were basically like, I have captured you, you're now effectively my slave that is going to work on my ships. So cheaper ship cost, which is good. Ships are very, very expensive. They also take a very long time to build, and if you ever lose a sea battle and are forced to rebuild your navy, you're going to be in a really, really rough shape. But even as the game goes on, you tend to be able to increase your force limit, especially if you're claiming a lot more territory, so you will be building ships throughout and replacing them, because as discussed in my actual England Let's Play, and I've confirmed it since then, ships don't automatically upgrade. So when you increase your technology level, say in the military technology, and you unlock a new type of cavalry. So at level 14, we would unlock the Latin Caracol cavalry. Or for infantry, at level 5, we unlock men-at-arms and longbow. At level 9, we get the Galogle? There's no way that's right. Infantry, and so on and so forth. Well, what you do in your military screen, you can pick from the pull-down menu, and you grab the newly upgraded option. And then all of your people sort of, their morale goes down to represent that sort of reorganization of unit, but then they've upgraded to the new unit type. With ships, you cannot upgrade. You can see there's no pull-down menu here. There's no ability to upgrade your existing ships to a better type. You have to disband them and then rebuild them. So that is actually quite an important little feature here, because you're going to be rebuilding your navy at some point, and it's going to be quite costly. And then the capstone ability is ships can repair when in coastal sea areas, because normally they can only repair when they're actually docked. So I don't know, it's very unspecific here. I don't know if you have to be adjacent to a friendly province or in supply or anything like that. I mean, it just says can repair in coastal sea areas at all. So it might, as long as you're on the coast, so not in the middle of the ocean, for example, you might be okay, even if it's not necessarily your territory. But I assume you have to be inside your supply limit. Or rather, if you're outside of the supply limit, the attrition is probably going to outpace any repair anyway. Next up, expansion ideas. So again, this is tied into the idea of colonization, although exploration is the #1 colonization idea. This is also tied into trade, although obviously trade ideas is there as well. But it seems to me it's a bit of a jack of all tradesy kind of thing. Actually, diplomacy also comes into play there, and I'm not sure if it's the sort of thing that you're going to take when you just want stuff in general, or if it's just going to be a way to combo. Like, you want colonization, but you've already picked up all your exploration ideas, so now you're going to go into expansion. Or you want all the trade ideas, and you've got all of those, and now you're going to go into expansion. I'm not sure how it's actually going to play out. Level 1, you get yourself a free colonist. Level 2, you get yourself the extra merchant. Level 3, you get faster colonies, which is certainly very good. Now, the same one, if I thought... Well, that's global settler increases. That's the number of settlers that you get, which effectively increases your settlement speed, but this actually decreases the time it takes for them to actually reach the colonies. Interesting little combo. +2 additional diplomatic relations. So I talked about how you've got a maximum number of diplomatic relationships that you can have at once, so alliances, royal marriages, that sort of thing, before you start to lose some amount of diplomatic power every month. So this would increase that max. Improved shipyard, 10% faster ship construction time. As discussed, ships take a really long time to build, and you will have to rebuild them over the course of the game. So that is never bad. Even if you're not looking to be a major naval power, you're going to have to be somewhat of a naval power if you're doing the colonization thing at all, because almost all the colonies will be overseas. Experienced diplomat, +3 diplomatic reputation. So you just have, if we talk to someone... where can we see? There's a place where we can see our effective reputation. Well, at this point, since it's 1444, we might not actually be able to see any, any actual number that's offset. But what it does is it makes it that much more likely that when you create any kind of deal, your reputation gets factored into all of those things. It's not the same as better relations over time. I think the reputation just acts as a static modifier to improve some of these. Oh, I see. Austria's diplomatic reputation. I'm currently at a +7 there, which helps me factor up these deals. So it just makes it more likely that the AI is going to accept. I believe it has no effect on player-to-player negotiation, for obvious reasons. Competitive merchants is next. 20% more global trade power, which is really good. I don't think I see a lot of +20%. I think I see a lot of +10%, like this, but it is quite far down. So again, it's one of those things where a lot of these diplomatic ideas, you kind of want to have a lot of them because they synergize nicely. You know, the more merchants you can get, the more you want more global trade power, for example. And then capstone ability, permanent CB against less advanced nations in Asia. So this is when, you know, you're going over and you want to build all you want to conquer territory in India, for example, set up your naval bases in the Far East. You know, as you do, then that's one of the keys to do it, because you do get those free CBs. I believe the reason they specify Asia there, because unless I am wrong, I think you very much get free CBs against the Americans, the Native American colonies, or sorry, Native American, like native nations over here. I think there's a lot of CBs available there. Although there's also the one for the pagans that you could get somewhere in the diplomatic category. I don't remember exactly where. But there's different options there. But it's pretty easy to get CBs against the natives. Less so, I suppose, against the Asian nations. I suppose one of the ways to do it is if you could, if they do count as pagan, which I'm not convinced that they do, or if they have a different government type than under diplomatic ideas here. That's another way that you could get the CBs. So there's a few different ways of doing it, but I actually quite like that, this mechanic here. And at this point, I mean, hopefully, I don't think this is a very early game idea, or especially not that capstone ability is not going to be something that comes into play early game. Although it's interesting in that potentially you could take this as an Asian nation. I wonder what would it say. You know what? I'm going to have to load a Ming game and double check that. If it gives you a CB against European ones, or if it's still against other less advanced nations in Asia. Curious. Military ideas. Obviously, if you're planning on doing warfare, military ideas are always going to be extremely attractive. And many of them have very, very potent abilities that make a huge difference at war. Not only do they make your troops considerably more effective, but the scary part is if your opponents have these ideas and you do not, then you can be in a really, really rough situation. They can really allow you to fight a war with far inferior forces and still win. So aristocratic ideas, you're going to see there's a pretty heavy cavalry theme, as I recall. Most notably is the ability to make cavalry 25% cheaper, which is important with cavalry because they do start off a lot more expensive. On the other hand, again, you don't tend to need to rebuild your actual land regiments too often. As long as they don't get annihilated outright, you don't have to rebuild the regiments. You just have to wait for your manpower to recharge. This means that, to me, aristocratic ideas is actually a very, very good pick for your first national idea, that level 4, because at that point you may not have reached your force limit yet, and early on in the game there's a lot of opportunity for quick expansions, so your force limit is going to shoot up pretty rapidly, and so you're going to be in a good position to use this kind of ability. And of course your force limit will continue to go up over the course of the entire game, assuming you're doing any expansion, and various technologies open up that give you additional force limit. A lot of actual nations have national ideas that give you increased cavalry or increased force limit, so you will be building units throughout. So it is nice, but to me less valuable than the cheaper ships. On the other hand, it's level 1, right, which is part of it. I think it's not entirely like this, but it feels like because the level 1 abilities are low-hanging fruit, they're not necessarily going to be quite as influential. On the other hand, +1 colonists, +1 diplomats, those are pretty potent. You'd have to wait until level 2 to get +1 merchants, though. Next up, local nobility gives us 100% increased hostile core creation cost on us. What does this mean? This means let's say we lose a war, we lose a province, and so we have a province where we have a core on it, and now our opponent is trying to create a core on that province. They will have to take twice as long, spend twice as much, well actually I'm not sure about twice as long, but they may have to spend twice as much administrative power to build a core on those provinces. I'm 99% sure that this is what this means, but I'm not 100% sure, so I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's it. So it makes it a lot harder for other people to grab territory from you and convert it permanently to one of their cores, which means that when you take it back, you're going to be in a much better position you're not going to have to deal with foreign cores on your territory quite as quickly. And assuming that's the way it works, I see this as being very tempting in multiplayer games because it's going to make it that much more annoying for other players. I'm not sure how much the AI is going to use this to weight their decisions about conquest, whereas a player would. But on the other hand, even an AI would still have the problem of just it takes forever to core these things, or it's very expensive to core these things. Serfdom, 25% bonus national manpower modifier, and the important thing about this is that not only does it increase the maximum amount of manpower that you can keep around in the pool, but it effectively increases the reinforcement rate because you get your manpower, you recharge your manpower pool. If you've gone down all the way to 0, it takes 10 years at a base to recharge your manpower pool. So the larger the pool, the more manpower you actually get back every year. So that's the unintended bonus right there. Plus there's a lot of manpower regeneration modifiers that you can pick up, so they really just synergize very, very nicely. So overall, really good. And of course, at peacetime, if you can rebuild your national manpower pool dramatically, then that means the next time you go into a full-on total war, you can really afford to slog it out for a lot longer than your opponent might be able to. Noble officers, +1 leader shock. So anything that can improve your leaders are pretty strong. These, like a full +1 to shock for your leader, is actually pretty stupendous in battle, especially if you're paying attention to making sure that your armies do have proper leaders, and if they're paired up with the right kind of unit types. International nobility, +1 diplomats, as discussed. Having extra diplomats is a very, very handy thing, especially if you're trying to do a lot of improved relations, but also if you're trying to annex vassals. Having the extra diplomats around is going to be invaluable for you, because 2 can really be tight. Sometimes you find yourself with 2 and not much to do, like realistically there's no relations that you really want to improve, but in practice I find that I tend to leave myself 1 free diplomat, and then With everyone else, I'm always improving relations. So the more of them you have, the better. Noble resilience. Cost of reducing war exhaustion is down by 20%, which is quite nice. So on our stability and expansion screen, there's the war exhaustion that goes up as you do battle, especially if you have raised your war taxes. And war exhaustion has many, many negative effects, which, too bad it won't show us here. Increased chance of revolution. It slows down your manpower. Your manpower sort of reinforcement rate. Recovery rate, that's the word I'm looking for. Your manpower recovery rate is affected by your war exhaustion and all kinds of things. And it actually hurts quite a bit once it gets quite high. So what you can do is you can spend some amount of, I believe it's diplomatic power, to reduce your war exhaustion. And so being able to make that cheaper is actually quite nice if you're fighting a long drawn-out war or a series of wars, for example. Military tradition, 10% cheaper military technology cost, obviously incredibly valuable. Every time you go up a technology level, you're going to be saving, anywhere from, say, 70 to 100 plus military power points, and that means quite a bit. Effectively almost shaving a year off every technology upgrade. So really nice. And our capstone abilities, 10% better cavalry combat ability. So obviously in the aristocratic ideas, you've got the cheaper cavalry to start off with, so having them be better is better. But also what this means is aristocratic ideas is an excellent pick if you're playing a nation that can have more cavalry already as part of their military group. For example, I think most people in the Eastern Tech group can do 60% cavalry. The Hordes can do 100%. I think the Muslim Tech groups could do like 80. I think the Mamluks could do 80% anyway when we took a look at them. So then it starts to, this starts to be very attractive from that point of view. Cheaper, more effective cavalry, and we can have more of it in our military. Let's go nuts. Now, cavalry does start to lose its luster later in the game. It's very powerful early on, but later on your infantry gets better and better and better, and specifically when backed with artillery, that really becomes the backbone of your army. But, the early game, everything snowballs, right? So the stronger your early game, the stronger your late game. So it's not a bad investment overall, plus it gives you all kinds of great stuff. Offensive ideas is probably the best military idea I've found. I feel like it's got some of the strongest modifiers and also unlocks some pretty important things. So I really feel that offensive ideas is your number one go-to military idea, unless you're trying to do something specific with cavalry. And why is that? Well, again, we can get the +1 leader shock, which is very, very powerful. 25% increased national manpower modifier, very good as discussed. And obviously they can stack. You could, take aristocratic ideas to bring it to level 3, offensive ideas bring it to level 2, and then you'd have a huge manpower pool if that's your thing. On the other hand, you could also just go for quantity, which we'll look at in a moment. Next up is superior firepower. Leader fire, +1, very good. Now, obviously, you do have to make sure, again, that you've got leaders in your armies, right? You've got to babysit them. You've got to make sure you don't have an army stack without a leader, which is A, always bad to start off with, and B, means you're losing out on even more of your modifiers over here. Next up, prestige from land battle is double. And this really does add up quite a bit, because again, the major way to get prestige is to, win battles in general and also win wars. But this means you can really hit your max of 100 prestige pretty easily in, 1 or 2 battles, and makes it a lot easier to maintain that. And there are, as discussed, some pretty significant bonuses to keeping a high prestige. One of the things is you can also do the personal unions if you've got royal marriages, because prestige does play a part in that. Leader land maneuver, again, just increasing your leadership ability in general. I find the maneuver is very, very potent on in land battles, because a lot of land battles tend to be about catching people and moving faster than them, and maneuver really has a dramatic effect there. And again, I think it reduces the attrition that you take, which is also pretty important, but don't quote me on that. Next up, Grand Army, 25% higher land force limit. So, more is not always better. Sometimes you want better troops, but sometimes you really do just want more troops. And this would let you keep a much bigger army without going over your force limit, which you can do, but it dramatically increases your maintenance costs. So this lets you keep a lot more troops around. Now, it doesn't give you more manpower, so there's still that sort of balancing act that you're playing, but it is very, very powerful to be able to do that. Esprit de corps, or how do you, esprit de corps, I think, gives you 10% extra discipline, which just means 10% more damage when you're in battle. And this is incredibly potent, and I would be tempted to say that this is absolutely the key ability to pick up in offensive ideas, but that's because we haven't talked about Force March yet. Force March is amazing. So if we, I'm playing as Austria right now, so let's grab an army, and you can see that there is a button right here for Force March. Force March increases your movement speed by 150%. You toggle it on, and while it is on, you move much, much faster. The downside is that you require some military power for every province that you cross. Now, I haven't actually played a game in this build where I have gained the ability to do Force March, so I don't know what the cost was. When I played in the beta in May, at that point, it cost 1 military power point per province, which to me is like effectively no cost. I mean, yeah, all right. I mean, it adds up over time, but the power of Force March was just too strong. Anytime you were trying to catch someone, you would always use Force March. You know, when you were just sort of redeploying people internally, then it wasn't much of a big deal. But 150% extra speed meant you could consistently catch other people. It also meant you could run away from a superior force. But it meant that you got to pick and choose your engagements unless you were up against someone else who had Force March. And to me, that's why that offensive ideas is the #1 military idea. Even if it gave you no other bonuses, and it does, but even if it didn't, Force March would be worthwhile. It's just so incredibly good, but it is a big investment. You're talking about spending 2,100 military points to unlock it, right? Because it's 300 per category, and there's 7 of them. So, you know, that's a pretty big investment, but definitely worthwhile if land battles are going to be your thing. Next up, defensive ideas, which to me are not quite as tempting. +1 extra yearly army tradition is actually very nice. More tradition leads to, well, we can look at what some of the modifiers are here. Gives you extra morale, which is really good. It doesn't look like much here just because I don't have much in the way of army tradition. Gives you faster manpower recovery speed, which is beautiful. And recover army morale speed, which is nice. You know, so after a battle, you're going to be able to start using your troops more effectively, a little bit faster. So army tradition is nice. Morale of the army plus 0.5 is actually very, very nice. Again, having higher morale gives you a lot more effectiveness in combat for the same number of troops. So you really get, you know, a lot better quality for your I don't know, more bang for your buck, which means every battle you go into, you're going to lose a little bit less manpower, so effectively this translates into more of that. It effectively almost translates into higher discipline for more damage. I mean, it doesn't really work the same mechanic, but it's effectively works that way. It means your army is less likely to break, which means you're more likely to outright win a battle, all kinds of goodness like that. Engineer Corps, Leader Siege +1. So again, you do need a leader assigned to your combat, but it means you can siege provinces much, much faster. And province sieging does take a long time, so a very nice ability to have. Regimental System, 10% cheaper land maintenance modifier. Obviously, your maintenance costs can get very, very expensive when you do have a large, well-developed military, especially if you're going with the higher quality, more expensive units like cavalry and artillery. The costs really do add up, especially at wartime where you want your maintenance slider to be at 100%. So you can save quite a few bucks every month by having this. Defensive mentality is 33% more effective fort defense. Fort defense is never something that really appeals to me. I always feel like, well, if the enemy is sieging my provinces, I'm already in bad shape. On the other hand, this buys you a lot more time with those sieges, which means if you're sieging them, they're sieging you. You're going to be able to finish your siege and then still be able to wrap around and defend your province. It gives you time to rebuild an army, to reorganize your army, and just keep that defensive footing a little bit longer. And it certainly is valuable. It's just, you know, I'm a very offensive-minded person when I go to war in these games, for good or for ill. So that never tempts me. 33% faster reinforce speed is very nice, although I find that reinforcement speeds are not terrible. Well, especially if you're fighting defensively. If you're in your own territory, your armies tend to reinforce very, very quickly, assuming there's any manpower left at all. But it does help when you're in offensive situations, especially if you're overseas. I believe it cuts your reinforcement speed even more dramatically. At least it felt that way when I was fighting the 100 Years' War as England, for example. So there's some value there, but again, it's a little less tempting. That's why overall defensive ideas don't really float my boat in the same way as the offensive ones. Improved foraging, 50% reduced land attrition, which is actually very, very good. So at this point in history, the armies really didn't bring supplies with them in the same way that you would think of it in modern terms. They'd mostly feed themselves off the land wherever they were. They would raid farms and houses and storehouses and all that kind of thing and use that to feed their military while they were away, as opposed to modern day sort of supply lines where you're just being fed from home as things are being transported out to you. So because of that, the way that it's simulated in here is that if your army stack is too big for a province, you get that attrition penalty. And so this cuts back over here on the amount of attrition that you get, because apparently they're just better at finding food. And then finally, the capstone ability is actually very, very cool here. +1 attrition for enemies. Now, I assume that this is when they are in your territory. But this is very, very, very good, because you can rapidly deplete their manpower pool by doing this. So even if they have more regiments than you and bigger stacks and more effective military, well, if you can keep fighting a sort of like defensive war where you continuously fall back and fall back and fall back, you can end up killing them off simply by attrition. If they run out of their manpower pool, their regiments at that point are just going to start shrinking, and you're eventually going to be able to take them. You combine this with the fact that it's going to take them a lot longer to siege your stuff because of your greater fort defense, and all of a sudden you're in pretty good shape. You can also do and I keep moving to Muscovy because that's where I deal with more attrition. In fact, you do. In the winter, the attrition is brutal. It is brutally sick. But one of the other things you can do is, we're calling it this one here. Scorch the earth. So if you're at war and you're in your friendly province, you can scorch the earth in your province, which effectively brings its supply limit down dramatically. You could scorch the earth, move back, and then, while you still are not in a terrible supply state exactly, enemy armies that move in there will have no food, so they will suffer from brutal attrition. So combine that with the idea that they're already going to get even extra attrition here, and you have a very, very good way to fight a war against a superior foe. And that's really what the defensive ideas is all about. Quality ideas. So quality, quantity. So quality ideas are going to be about continuing to improve your troops without necessarily giving you more of them, which frankly I like quite a bit. So you get straight up 10% more infantry combat ability, then increased army morale speed, the recovery of the army morale, which is discussed is nice in terms of getting your troops back into combat a little bit faster, but I'm not convinced it's like the most important thing, and maybe I'm wrong and just, really bad at battle. But see, this is why I like the 10% infantry combat ability, 10% cavalry combat ability, 10% heavy ship combat ability, this is the Navy morale speed recovery, and then light ship combat ability, and then artillery combat ability, and finally, overall 15% more discipline, and that's 15% more damage overall. So just this straight up just makes all your troops just more effective. You don't have to worry about the funny mechanics. You don't have to worry about, oh yes, I absolutely need the leader to make the most out of the situation. Obviously, you always want leaders in general, but this is just straight up, all your stuff is just better. And it is a very, very good idea. Then you've got quantity, which is just literally let's make more stuff. They're not necessarily going to be better, you're just going to have more of it. And since they're not better, it means there is, you are going to burn through more actual manpower in any given battle. But on the bright side, you're going to have more of it, and it's going to regenerate faster. So, is it 6 of one, half a dozen of the other? Maybe. So cheaper cavalry costs, only 10% though, as opposed to, say, the 25% over here. So that is not a deep discount, but it's, it's still there. Manpower recovery speed plus 20%, and this is very, very, very nice. Even if you didn't take everything into quantities idea, just having this by itself will really enable you to fight much bigger wars. On the other hand, if you are in a situation where your manpower pool is maxed out, it no longer helps. And so it's almost like I would prefer 20% more manpower in general, because that also kind of converts to 20% more manpower recovery. Enforced service, 10% cheaper infantry cost. Okay, it's fine. The old and infirm decreases your land maintenance modifier by 10%. That is nice because, again, your costs do add up quite a bit over time. Ship's penny, 10% cheaper ship cost. This I like more than the others because, again, you do have to replace the ships, so you will end up using this bonus more frequently, and also ships are very, very expensive. Standardized artillery, 10% cheaper artillery cost. Levée en masse, which is 50% more national manpower. And this is very, very, very nice. Because again, even in peacetime, just being able to recharge a higher pool just gives you so much more flexibility in war. And then the capstone ability is 33% increased land force limit modifier. So that's the number of regiments that you can maintain without your maintenance costs going up. So quantity ideas is fine, but I would much prefer something like quantity ideas. And even then, I think I much prefer offensive ideas, especially for the ability to unlock force march by itself. If nothing else, being able to do that would be fantastic. So there you go. As per this particular preview build, this is what the various ideas provide. I expect that going forward, this is definitely going to be something where we're going to see a lot of balance over time. I don't feel like anything is necessarily unbalanced, but I'm sure that once this is handed to players, they will quickly discover that certain ideas are overwhelmingly powerful and some are underwhelmingly so. And it's easy to tweak the numbers. Make this 15% instead of 10%. Make this one 20% instead of 25%. So little things like that. I don't think there's going to be any dramatic changes. I do see that it would be very easy to imagine that as the game goes forward, they might add more ideas, especially if there's more mechanics added, like in the expansions that are undoubtedly going to come out at some point, which may introduce entirely new mechanics to the game. Well, then that may be reflected in additional ideas, or just a remake of some of the existing ones to sort of shake things around, because a lot of them obviously give you the same type of thing. There's a lot of things that give you slightly cheaper military units or slightly more manpower or something like that. And so it gives you the opportunity to make each one slightly more specialized by removing some of the duplication. On the other hand, I quite like the duplication because what it leads you... it's not that I like the duplication, it's that I don't mind the duplication because it gives you the ability to take two ideas that synergize. Yeah, they're duplicates, but you can also get them both and have twice the effect in one way and really specialize something about your nation. So there you go. There are all the national ideas. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.